Tonight on Nation to Nation, Jagmeet Singh is in our studio to talk about a wide range of things. But it was a busy week for the federal NDP leader on Parliament Hill, so let's take a look back. On Monday, it was all about the tensions over lobster in Nova Scotia. Here's Singh in question period.
And both Conservative and Liberal governments have failed the Mi'kmaq people. And as a result, we've all seen the horrible images of fires being set to facilities, traps being cut, intimidation and assault. Now, while all this has happened, the Prime Minister has stood by idly and not acted.
Then, during the House's emergency debate on Nova Scotia's fishery, he repeated his allegation of terrorism, something he first said a week ago.
We all saw the heartbreaking images, the incredibly intimidating images, and frankly, the terrorism, the violence perpetrated against Indigenous people.
But things changed on Tuesday, as the Conservatives introduced a motion to create an anti-corruption committee to look into government scandals. Prime Minister Trudeau said if it passed, that would be a loss of confidence in his government, and a federal election would be the result. The Conservatives and the Bloc Québécois plan to vote for the committee, so all eyes turned to Singh. Would he or wouldn't he support the Liberal minority? On Tuesday, he wouldn't commit one way or the other, and said it's not on the NDP to prevent an election.
Entirely the Prime Minister that has set this up. It is not on anyone else. And if the Prime Minister is just looking, grasping at straws to find an excuse to go to an election, he should just tell people, hey, I'm looking to go to an election.
The next day, Singh again did not indicate whether his party would vote for or against the Conservative motion.
We are voting for Canadians. We are voting against an election. We are going to continue to work for people. And that means continuing to hold the government to account.
And then a few hours later, this happened in the House.
180. Je déclare la motion rejetée.
So that's where we stand today with no election in the immediate future. Hello, I'm Todd Lamaran, and welcome to Nation to Nation. Tonight our guest is Jagmeet Singh. He says he's always had a sense of social equality, rooted in the racism he's personally faced. When he was a lawyer, he offered free legal rights clinics. So it's probably not surprising he's also the critic of Indigenous issues for his party, as well as its leader. Welcome to Nation, Mr. Singh.
Thank you so much.
Now, you supported the Liberal government in yesterday's vote because you said you didn't want Canadians to face an election during the pandemic. But how much longer do you expect to keep propping up this minority government?
Well, I want to be clear. We didn't support the Liberal government. What we did is we voted against the election that Prime Minister Trudeau was trying to put on Canadians. He was trying to blame the opposition. He was trying to find an excuse to go to an election, and we did not give him that excuse. And if we look at what's happened throughout the pandemic, the confidence of the House has been tested a number of times. Canadians sent us to Parliament in a minority government to find ways to make government work for people, and that's been my focus. Most recently, the bill that was passed in the House that brought in paid sick leave, something we fought for, as well as kept the amount of support to people at $2,000, something the Liberals wanted to cut to $1,600. That was passed unanimously. All parties supported it, and that was a confidence motion. So in that case, the Conservatives, the Bloc, all parties voted to continue to help people. So we've shown that there is confidence in helping people, and as New Democrats, we've led the way in actually showing what the help should be that people are looking for, the help that they want, that they need. And we're going to continue to do that. In a pandemic, our goal is to find ways to help people. If we get to a point where we can no longer do that, we are prepared to look at all options.
But usually you've been in some sort of negotiations with the Liberal government to get something from them to help to support them. And I got the sense from watching your press conferences this week, and I believe you came out and said it, that there were no negotiations this time. So if there's no give and take, why continue to support the minority government?
Well, there's got to be a reason to go to an election. And in this case, the Prime Minister was trying to go to an election over a committee. And I can't imagine how the Prime Minister would justify that, how he would go to people who are worried about their jobs, worried about increasing numbers of the pandemic, worried about their loved ones in long-term care homes. How would he justify that we're in an election right now because he didn't like a committee? And I want to remind folks, the Conservatives made this committee sound like it was the be-all, end-all. Well, all the evidence so far whether we're talking about the Kielburgers testifying in the WE scandal, or the ministers that testified, or the documents that were released, were all obtained through the existing committees, the Ethics Committee, the Finance Committee. So we've got tools that exist right now that we're going to continue to use. In fact, yesterday, right after or right at the same time as a vote, we tabled a motion calling for more witnesses to come before the Ethics Committee.
The Conservatives are proposing another motion today that the Health Committee probe the government's handling of the pandemic, and a vote is expected on Monday. Will the NDP be doing the same thing again if the Prime Minister again threatens an election over that motion?
Well, we've said that this motion is something that we're supporting. Obtaining documents is very fundamental. It's the job of opposition to request information, to hold the government to account. So we've already indicated that we'll be supporting that.
So the government, if Mr. Trudeau does the same thing, then this could be the thing that sends us into an election this fall.
Mr. Trudeau could choose to go to an election at any point in time. It is absurd, and frankly stupid, to make an opposition day motion a confidence vote. If Prime Minister wants to do that, basically he's just trying to force an election. There's no other way to explain it. It would not be on the opposition if simply requesting documents would result in an election. What confidence motions usually are can you pass a budget? Can you get past spending? Can you get a supply motion through? Meaning, can you actually continue to function? But if Prime Minister Trudeau wants to go to an election because he doesn't want to give information to the opposition, documents to see if they're spending money the right way, or healthcare information to assess the healthcare response, that's going to be on the Prime Minister.
If Mr. Trudeau comes to you and says, we'll finally give you, I know one of your concerns, there hasn't been enough support for people with disabilities, for example. If he came to you saying we'll support that, would you then maybe change your mind about this opposition motion?
Well, if we can, our goal is what's in the best interest of people. If we can find a way to help people, we'll always be open to finding a way to help people. If there's a bill that needs to be passed that's going to get money to students who are still waiting to see that $900 million they were promised, that the Liberals failed to give to students and instead gave to their close friends at WE, we'll find a way to support that as well. If there's a way to get help to Canadians living with disabilities, or a way to bring in standards for seniors in long-term care homes, we want to find ways to help people. And if the Liberals are looking for our support on getting some of that important work done, we're always, our doors are always open to talk about that.
Has he picked up the phone and called you yet about this?
No, I've not had a conversation about that yet.
So I suppose before I move on, exactly what's your gut feeling? Do you think we'll have an election before Christmas?
This is going to be it's a really good question. I think this is going to be something that only the Prime Minister can answer. Like, Justin Trudeau has the power to call an election. We've shown when it comes to actually getting help to people throughout the pandemic, a lot of the work that we did to bring forward help for students, for example, that was passed unanimously as well. The fight we brought, the fight that we fought to bring in paid sick leave for all Canadians, that was also something that we fought for, but we got all party support to pass. So it seems to me very clearly, if it's about helping people, we're able to make government work. But if the Prime Minister is just hell-bent on finding a way to go to an election, then he'll find a way to do that.
Do you think this minority government has been something that's worked out for the NDP, because you've been able to get some of your goals pushed through, where you may not have in, I suppose, during a majority government?
Well, I don't look at it as if it's worked out for us as a party. I look at it as people are better off because we were there. Like, people, in a very measurable way, have more help, more support because we were there. And I'm proud of that. That's something I'm certainly proud of. And I want to be able to continue to do that. I think it's important for people that they get the help they need. Families that are worried about their kids, that are worried about their jobs, they need to know that there's someone there fighting for them. And I think we've shown through this pandemic, we're there fighting for people.
Can this minority government finish some of the work as promised? I'm going to bring up Romeo Saganash's Bill 262, the UNDRIP bill, which failed, but the Liberal government promised to table a bill and have it passed. Do you see that work happening before we have another election?
Something we believe in. It's something that we think is very important, and the declaration should be brought to Parliament and passed. So we are ready to support that. Like I said before, if the Liberals need to pass any bill or want to pass any bill, they need the support of another party. I can put it out there very clearly. If there's a desire on the part of the Liberals to work with us to bring in the United Nations Declaration. We're ready to do that.
But why hasn't been tabled? I suppose they could have just rewritten Mr. Saganash's bill and tabled it by now. Do you have to maybe poke them some more, or what's going to get that on the table before, Christmas or next summer?
Yeah, you mentioned poking. What we've found is that none of the work that we've achieved, none of the victories we've achieved for people were things that the Liberals were going to do anyways. We had to fight for them. And so we found is that they're not going to just do it. We have to continue to push. And so we've raised this issue, and we've had conversations about it. They, again, mentioned it in promises. But our biggest concern with the Liberal government is Justin Trudeau says a lot of the right things, but doesn't actually implement them, doesn't actually do them. So we're here to push and to prod and to fight and to say these things need to be done. But again, it's on the Liberal government to do them. Like, they are in government. And so we're here to push and fight. And we're going to do our best to make sure things are done.
I'm just going to mention one other thing that may not, I don't know if will get finished before another election. The Public Safety Committee has been looking at systemic racism in policing. Is that work ever going to see the light of day?
I hope it is. I mean, this is something that is so simple to me. Like, we know that there's a problem. The Prime Minister took a knee, but what's the point of taking a knee if he's not willing to take a stand? He is the Prime Minister. Who is he protesting? Like, when he took a knee at a protest about systemic racism, like, who was he protesting? He is the Prime Minister of Canada. So what we said is there's some simple steps we could take right away. Make it clear in legislation and policy that there is to be no carding or street checks, arbitrary stopping of someone because of the color of their skin. And we know that happens to Indigenous people. We know that happens to Black people. It happens to racialized people. That can be immediately banned at the federal level, which would go a long way to ending the practice with federal regulated policing, but also encourage other levels of policing to stop as well. We know there could be a review of the use of force to make sure we completely overhaul when is it ever appropriate to use force. And then the big shift we want to see is that if someone's going through a healthcare crisis, I think about the Indigenous woman who had a wellness check in New Brunswick, or the racialized man that had a mental health crisis in Mississauga. These are people that needed help, and instead of getting help, they were killed by the police. And there's no question in these cases, in both circumstances, the police were the ones that directly shot and killed those people. And how could it ever be that if someone needs help, ends up dying? That should never be the case. And so we need a shift in who is the responder. If someone is in a healthcare crisis, there should be a healthcare worker. So those are some of the changes that should happen right away.
Okay, I want to talk some more with you, but we have to take a break, and we'll have more with Jagmeet Singh shortly. Welcome back. We're still here with Jagmeet Singh, leader of the federal NDP party, and we're going to focus a little more on Indigenous issues. And I want to go back to first time I interviewed you, when you first came aboard as leader. I could tell you still weren't that comfortable with Indigenous issues. So did you have a lot to learn over the past, 18 months or 2 years since you've been leader?
Well, I would say that we're always learning, and I'm always someone who believes in constantly learning. The injustice that Indigenous communities face, you really can feel it and see it at the federal level. That's where it's the most apparent. At the provincial level, I spoke with a lot of Indigenous community groups and witnessed some of the really terrible conditions. But at the federal level, you get to see firsthand the legacy of some really horrible decisions and the impact it's had on people. The systemic racism is even more apparent because of the history of Canada as a nation and how it's treated Indigenous people. So that's something that was put up front and really in front of me at the federal level.
Is that why you took on the role of Indigenous critic yourself instead of giving it to a caucus member?
Yeah, there's something about it that I thought as a leader, the goal is to have a nation-to-nation relationship. And in many of the meetings, when I would meet with Indigenous leaders and nations, they would request to meet with a leader to enforce this principle that it's a nation-to-nation relationship, it's a leader-to-leader, and in doing so, I thought there's something significant about that, and I wanted to just show how important it is to me by taking that role and taking on the responsibility, and it's a lot of work, it's important work, and it matters to me. And I've experienced some in my life of what it's like to be up against systemic racism or challenges or barriers. So it gives me a little bit, maybe some sense of what it's like for Indigenous communities.
I think we saw that in the House too. I recall a Bloc Québécois member, and you got upset with him a couple of months ago. Was that ever resolved to your satisfaction?
Well, the reason why I got upset is I had spoken with a lot of Indigenous communities that talked to me about the pain of what it's like to be faced with policing that is systemic, that exhibits systemic racism. The pain of that, what that feels like, how it makes you feel like you don't belong in your own country, the land that you've inherited. You were the first people of this land, and for police to treat you in a way that makes you feel like you're not welcome, you don't belong, that there's something wrong with you. And then the deaths that have happened, the brutality, the victimizing, the beating, and the killing of Indigenous people. In that moment, I just felt the pain of that, and I thought, why would someone stand in the way of trying to force this Liberal government and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to do something? Why would someone stop an attempt to get something done? So I was frustrated, and I think folks appreciated that I felt the frustration that many people feel every day, and that by calling it out, something I didn't plan to do, they thought, that's someone speaking from the heart about what we're going through, and then also not willing to apologize. At some point, it became not about me.
Yes, I recall.
It was about the people who said, you know what, because you were fighting for us, if you apologize, it's like you're letting us down. And so I didn't want to let the people down. So it was something important, but I'm not resolved because the Prime Minister is still not taking action. That's really the goal of all this, was to get Justin Trudeau to do something. He still hasn't done any concrete step to address racism, systemic racism in policing at the federal level. And we know the RCMP is very much present in Indigenous communities. So the fact that they're not, no concrete step has been taken is just it's wrong.
You talk about the RCMP not doing anything, and that accusation was leveled as Mi'kmaq fishers in Nova Scotia have faced harassment and vandalism. And about a week ago, I certainly saw it on Twitter, you said this is terrorism. Do you think those words are too strong? I know it was leveled not just at the RCMP, but at non-Mi'kmaq fishers as well.
Well, I mean, what would you call physically intimidating, harassing, threatening to burn down someone's place of work and then burning it down, threatening someone who's just trying to earn a livelihood? I mean, that is all those steps, burning someone's building and someone's place of work and their vans, and physically intimidating and assaulting someone. Those are all purposely done to make someone afraid, to terrorize somebody. And I can't imagine that happening to another community if they weren't Indigenous. Like, this is specifically happening to Indigenous people, and it's wrong. And that's why I called it out.
Do you think the Liberal government is to blame? I mean, this is an issue that's been festering for 20 years, so there's been a succession of governments, not just the Trudeau government. I mean, who should we be putting the blame on right now?
Well, right now it's got to be the Prime Minister, because he's currently in government. But in fairness, this is clearly at the feet of Liberal governments and Conservative governments. For the past 2 decades, since the court case was won, it's been both Conservative and Liberals that have been in power. They absolutely are responsible. No one did the work. Case was won. It established that the Indigenous community has a right to earn a moderate livelihood. And it was the court that said now the government has to put that in place, show what that is, put it into practice. And the Conservative government failed to do that under Harper. And now Prime Minister Trudeau has failed to do it. He had a majority government for now almost 6 years. He had 5 years of majority, and now he's been in government for another year in minority, has not resolved this. So yeah, there's no question. This is right now, currently, the fault of Justin Trudeau, and in the past, it was the fault of Stephen Harper.
Well, what would the NDP do, especially with the commercial fishers who are complaining that their livelihood is at stake? And I know some of it came out on the Fisheries Committee that happened last night.
Well, there's a couple of things we could do right away. One is there's no time for delay. We need to immediately move to establishing what is a moderate livelihood. The court has determined that that's allowed, And the Mi'kmaq community also cares deeply about conservation. So I don't think that conservation argument has any merit. The community is very concerned about conservation. So there's three things that could happen. One, it should be the Mi'kmaq community that's at the table of determining what is a moderate livelihood. There should be evidence-based decision around that, science around what appropriate conservation is. And we know that's already being followed because the percentage of the catch that the Mi'kmaq fishers are responsible for is a very small amount. It is in no way affecting conservation. But it should be evidence-based. It should be with the Mi'kmaq community at the table and with the federal government sitting down and establishing what it is.
Well, before we let you go, I just wanted to ask a few personal questions. I'll take this moment and the time to do it. How do you find being leader of a party, a federal party? Is it more difficult than you ever imagined?
Well, it's a great responsibility, but it's also a great honor. Like I feel really blessed and lucky and honored that I have the ability to do something meaningful for people, that I can use the position I have to fight for people and make their lives better. That is a big weight on me, but it's also something that I find that gives me a lot of joy, gives me a lot of satisfaction that I can actually try to do something meaningful. So it's not an easy job, but I think anything that's special or meaningful is not easy. It takes work, and I'm ready for it. I appreciate it. I'm thankful for it. And I'm going to keep on doing it as long as I can.
As a person who's a member of a visible minority, has it made it different, your approach to politics, where a lot of people say in the past it's just been a lot of non-Indigenous people up there talking and making a mess of things?
Well, I think my life experiences have given me some more insight into what people go through. I think about the times that my family went through really tough financial difficulties. We went through a time period where we lost our home, and we were struggling financially. Things were really tough. So I get a bit of an idea of what it's like for people who are living paycheck to paycheck. I remember when I was taking care of my little brother, and if I wasn't earning money, it wasn't just me that wasn't able to eat. It meant my kid brother wasn't able to eat. So then when we talk about help to people, the urgency that we fought for things comes from that experience, like knowing what it's like a bit. Having faced systemic racism, I'm aware of what it's like to be treated a certain way because of the way you look. So it makes me more sensitive to that. When I see it happening to Indigenous people, I can feel it from a personal point where I've experienced a little bit of what that's like. Not to say I can experience the full range of what it is for Indigenous people, but I have a little bit of an understanding because of some of those life experiences. Well,
it's been a pleasure to have you sit down and actually come in our studio during this COVID era and talk to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll have more after another short break. Welcome back. That's our show for this week. But before we go, we're going to end with Jagmeet Singh doing his version of that viral TikTok video. You know the one, done to the tune of Fleetwood Mac's Dreams. I'm Todd Lamaran. Stay safe and healthy, and thanks for watching.